The Kybalion, a conversation by Julie Benetti and Susan Barbaro, is a production of EI Publishing in association with EI Alliance, copyright 2018. Visit eipublishing.com for more. Music for this series is courtesy of New Threads, copyright 2018, from their self-titled album, available now.
Well, hello, this is Susan Barbaro, and this is our second podcast talking about the Kybalion, and I'm here with Julie Benetti.
Hello.
And we're going to start talking about a very powerful principle. It's the second principle, and it's the principle of correspondence.
Can I just interject? I have a really, it's so
You're
funny.
gonna.
Every time, yes, I'm gonna. That wasn't a question.
Put
That
up
was
your
rhetorical.
dues.
So every time I read this, I know what it is, and I don't know if it's because I'm a writer or what, but I can't get beyond correspondence, as in writing a letter. It's the funniest thing.
It's a different definition for
right.
for the word.
Yet what I'm talking about is my mind always wants to go to
Writing a letter.
and so it's funny that it keeps on
It's
trying to go into that loop.
It's a corresponding.
Right. What corresponds? Yes. So it could be opposites. It could be one to the other. It could be exactly. And so that's what I just wanted to interject. So go ahead.
So it's the quote from the Kybalion is, "As above, so below. As below, so above." And so this is talking, the part that makes this such a powerful principle to me is we use it all the time in science. It's a powerful, and it talks about how do you understand something that you can't see? How can you understand something that you can't touch? How can you, it's almost like if you see, you go and you see a little dog, a little puppy, and you're like, oh my God, he's so cute. And you're like, how do you know you don't go over and you're going to pat him and he's got all prickle, it's all like a porcupine. How do you know that? Well, because you can it's a correspondence of you've touched a dog before. It could be the same kind of a dog, and his fur is soft. And, they look up, their little puppy will look up and lick you in the face. And so you can use that correspondence of some experience. And then you can look at the dog that maybe you can't access. Maybe they're in a house or, someplace where you can't. And you can, that's a little bit of how we use it, as well as science uses it. Go ahead, you want to say something?
I'm just thinking, because it's funny that you brought that up, because I'm not going to say I disagree, which you love to say to me. But what I am going to say is to complement that. This is like the real simple version of it is so you know that. So because you know that, the things that you think you don't know, you know as well.
Right.
And
so
that
you're not disagreeing.
No, I'm not, but you never disagree with me either, although you like to say you are, which is funny.
I don't.
Because that's a principle of correspondence right there. So now when you say that, I'm going to say, hey, that's the principle of correspondence.
I'm going to say, go write a letter.
But this you're funny. A for effort. That's what I'll give you. So what? That's right. I stole your words for once instead of you snaggling mine. So yeah, this is really funny, because what I also want to say is what you say all the time. You say your dad used to say. To me, this is when I look at it. This is the most wonderful spiritual weasel clause there is. Because it's like, oh my God, I don't know that. I could not begin to know the mysteries of the universe. Well, because you know other things. Of course you know the mysteries of the universe. It's kind of like a reverse weasel clause, which, is great. Which, if you kind of go with that, and then you go back to the principle of mentalism, and you go, oh, the mind. Well, of course, it's all created by the mind. And now I'm going to project, so you might want to stop me. But it's all created in the mind, and we're all connected to the all. So, of course... Oh wow! So what happens above, below? But it makes all sense.
So the only thing I want to say is, is that the principle, because we just went right into it because we read it. But the principle basically says is if you can understand a plane, and they use the words planes, that we're in various planes in this world. If you can understand what occurs on one plane, they all correspond to one another. So, like I said, I can look outside and I can, see how the wind blows and a tree moves. Well, because I know that happens here. We're in Massachusetts. Well, if I see or hear of the winds blowing out in Utah somewhere, I can assume that trees are blowing because it's the same plane, different, and they're actually using that.
So actually, the planes. So that's a good example on the physical
Yeah, I
plane
know.
because they take this physical, mental, and spiritual planes.
So where I was going to go from there is talk about the planets. I mean, and they're going out and they're measuring things based on, of course, but they look up at a telescope and they measure how much a planet or star has moved. And I mean, if we look through that, it may be, I don't know, and, you could move an inch or 2 inches, but that's not that the planet actually moved 2 inches. It's corresponding to the magnifying lens.
Well, you look on a map, and they have that little, what is that chart
Yeah, the
called?
scale.
Yeah,
A scale. So
the scale of meters. Or
right,
whatever.
but it's and so you're using what we know here, and they're actually doing it as well with, well, actually they're not doing it with dark matter. They're looking out and they're seeing things aren't moving, certain planets, and I'm not a science, so they can go on and say you got it wrong, and that's fine, whatever. But the thing is that they're looking, as I understand it, they're looking out and they're expecting certain planets or stars to orbit a certain way based on physics, and they're not doing it. And so that's where they're saying there's this dark matter, this dark energy, and they're looking out, way out in space to do it. Whereas I'm going to say we are made of space, everything that came from space. So wouldn't we find dark matter and dark energy right here amongst us? Why would we need to look so far out in space? I'm sure there's certain, and I know I'm making it a simple example, yet I mean, so
well, actually, you exhibited exhibiting the law of correspondence right there. I mean, when you're taking the manifestation from this physical, spiritual, and mental plane, I mean, why is there any difference between anything? I mean, that's a real similitude to say it that way. Yet, what you just said, when you explain it better, you might want to explain the weasel clause. But saying that, I mean, why can't you prove anything? I mean, so everything you think you don't know, you actually know. So when sometimes when you go against your intuition, or I mean, a lot of people say, I've had a feeling of this or whatever, and they don't go by their gut feelings. They don't go by, and that's
because
too.
we don't believe it. And I think if you understand the principle of correspondence, and it doesn't mean we have 100% of the answers, because we're always learning something new. We're always understanding things different. And so the only thing I ever throw in is to be open-minded. Yet, we can't say we don't know anything. I mean, Einstein sat there and came up with all these,
incredible theories that mathematicians had to prove later on.
And so now they're proving it.
Yeah.
And it's like the difference between what they're saying here and science is science says something, and then they need proof. And then they say, okay, we can go with it. What this is saying is you understand something, you take it as being, a possibility, and then you move from there. I didn't call it a truth, but it's a possibility, and a possibility based on a straightforward rationale. It's me using the idea of a puppy. I can look at it and, I may not be able to pat it, but I can understand why I want to pat it.
And it's interesting because now that I think of why my mind goes to correspondence as writing a letter, because when you write a letter, there's a feeling that you write a letter, you're writing a letter to someone. In the old days of Jane Austen or whatever you want to say, when people wrote letters, even emails, you're looking for a correspondence, a reply. So there's a kind of condition there where there's an equal give and take or a reply. And with that, the principle of correspondence, as above so below, as below so above, it just simply states that that's the way it is between all those planes.
And so it says, knowledge of the principle of correspondence enables man to isn't that funny? I always read things differently. Enables man to reason intelligently from the known to the unknown. And my whole thing about this is the weasel clause in this is that if I say, oh, these people are, I don't mean people say, it's like, oh, those people are stupid. And I can say, well, I just know that because, I dealt with some certain kind of person. Well, that's small-minded. I never said that to work in this plane of correspondence, it's not a knowing. It's a being open-minded to anything being possible, yet turning off that switch that's, oh, I don't know. Nope, I don't know that. It's like, really? And I think there's something more to that. I think I think the problem with this, if I think about nowadays, is the weasel clauses. People say, well, I know that. That teacher's going to fail me. I know it. That's what they do. This teacher doesn't like me. And it's like, wait a second.
Well, now you're blending into the mentalism, the principle of mentalism. It's kind of funny because when you were just saying that, I thought of, we love libraries. I thought of you walk into a library and you're going in there to get something that you want to learn more about and you want to know something about. Yet in the library, there's a lot of unknowns in there, but there's a lot of knowledge, so it's there. So there's a variance in that correspondence for everything that manifests in the spiritual, mental, and the physical plane, that there's a knowing that maybe that your mind says, okay, this is all I know, yet it's still just your mind. And if you go back, this is where it becomes very layered. If you go back to the principle of mentalism, the first one that of course bleeds through all of them as well, if you go back to it, so your mind knows, but your mind's connected to the all. It goes back to that whole cycle. So you know everything. Yet it's not that judgment aspect of, okay, like you said.
So I don't agree with you because you know what? There's a part of that that's hard. There's a part of that you don't know how much is it my perspective is off. We talk about that all the time. We think we know something, yet our perspective is off.
And so what the principle of correspondence is saying is that you can intelligently reason from the known to the unknown, rather than saying, my perspective is off, I have no idea.
So I hear you. And what I think is that people can get into trouble if you read this. You just said intelligently reason, and that is the weasel freaking clause of this. I'm going to say it, you could talk to
well, you just read it.
I know, but where I'm going, I'm reading the in between. Stop it. I'm going into the reading what's in between. There's your goddamn weasel
That's
clause.
what I'm telling. That's right.
And so what I'm saying is that's, again, it's not being said. How do you, and so Julie and I do a lot of work. I constantly wait a second, what I think I know, I don't know. And so this is what I think the key is to this, is if it is based in a judgment, you don't know it. That's not a truth. And truth is a reasonably intelligent. Yet the problem becomes, I can sit here and you can maybe, or someone listening could say, well, she's saying something, there's a judgment. I don't hear it. Because I just think it's a truth. And I constantly, it's like peeling a layer of, an onion, keep pulling the layers of what is a reasonably intelligent, correspondence and not a judgment. And that's, I think, is just so important, because that can backfire on you.
Well, it's interesting because the weasel clause too is that this
Thanks, Dad.
principle of correspondence enables man to reason intelligently.
Yeah.
It doesn't say every man has the key and is going to successfully reason intelligently. So it enables man. So you got a key to the front door, but if you bang it down, you can get in as well.
So where I go with this is I'm not interested in fixing anybody. I'm not interested
Me
in
neither.
telling people they're right or they're wrong, because who the hell am I to decide whether what someone's doing is right or wrong? So I always go to myself. So how do I move in that space of keeping judgment at bay and consistently being open-minded and reasonably try to figure out something without bringing in, I'll call it baggage. I mean, we all have it. We all grew, and it's not bad. We all grew up with tradition. We all grew up with habits, and we all grew up with being told certain things. And you and I keep trying to undo it and undo it and undo it. Yet that seeps in, and everyone's on their own path, and it's not about me telling anyone. So it's, how do I do it? I mean, that's the question I ask.
And so what I would ask too in relation to that is, don't you think there's a reason why this is the second principle? Because the first one is mentalism.
Yeah.
And if that's the kahuna principle, then how do you do it? Quite possibly mentally. So in the structure of the principle of mentalism, in overlaying the principle of correspondence, you know, you probably have, I'm not going to say 80-20, 90-10, 99% chance of reasoning intelligently.
Do you know what? You have 100% of awareness. You have 100% of awareness. So when you go, and I'm going to sit there and I'm going to say, I understand this. I know how this works. I may not know 100%, because we don't know 100% of anything. I don't care who you are. But I can reasonably, intelligently, you know, make a
move.
I don't want to say assumption, whatever, as to how something else works. And when you're talking about a mechanical thing, it's a little bit easier. You know, if you look, you know, you get just into science as to how, but if you go into...
But isn't that a huge leap? Because what you just said is, okay, so then in knowing this, I can begin to possibly know what I don't know the unknown. And that's all the principle of correspondence is saying.
Right.
And that's just a huge leap from the beginning of our conversation to here.
All I'm saying, I'm not disagreeing. Wait a second. I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. Where I go is because I always bring it to, you know, Julie's always out there and I'm always more here, and I try to ground it. Like, well, how do I do it better? That's what I ask. How do I understand that principle, but how do I put it into use in a non-judgmental way? And I think, at least if I have the awareness, if I, you know, I go and, you know, I grew up in Italian background. My father used to sit there and, you know, we'd say things about Italians, joke about, but if I want to make an assumption as I like all Italians or I don't like all Italians, that's pretty presumptuous. That's me bringing in something that I believe, yet the truth is, what is being Italian? I mean, there's certain things, but I can't say that. And so if I come and someone steps in and they're Italian, I'm like, oh, that means you eat meatballs and have spaghetti on Sundays. Well, who the hell am I to say that? And if I assume that because I grew up that way, which I didn't, but if I did, and then I say, so everybody who's Italian heritage just does the same thing, that's, you know, and it can sound like it's a good thing. Oh, we know it's a good thing, yet I'm bringing in a judgment.
Well, you're also fine-tuning it just to the physical plane. So when you take the physical, the mental, and the spiritual, and
as I said, I'm simplifying.
Well, the law of correspondence is pretty intense. That the principle of correspondence and simplifying it in just one realm.
Okay, so
is
will
doable.
Jump. I'm going to make the leap
It's
right
doable.
now. If I'm going to say that how I am here is how I must be on the other side when I'm not here, when I've passed on before I've been born, then that's assuming that the things that I understand about here is how I'm going to be. If I'm funny here, because I think I'm freaking funny, I must be freaking funny on the other side.
No comment.
But what I'm saying is that, so you bring it to the spiritual. I'm even saying even from the physical to physical is a challenge.
So again, you're expressing, bringing it to the spiritual through a physical way.
But
So
that's
it's
the
just
planes, but that's what they're
generically
talking
the
about,
spiritual,
the planes.
the mental and the physical and the manifestation on all, and just even, our thought and our process of thought. I mean, it's funny, you were talking about patting a dog.
Talking about that.
You were talking about patting a dog and knowing what that is. And because you know it, what you don't know, you also know.
Okay. So what I'm trying to do is I'm bringing it in a very practical understanding. And I don't mean, because if I can do it in a practical way, I can start to begin on a spiritual way. Because as we go further on, it says we can't understand the all. We can never understand it. We're a part of it, but it's something that we can't understand. And so if it says it in there, don't give me that funny look. And so where I'm going is if I can start to begin to understand it on a simpler level, then I can begin to understand it on a grander level.
Right, and that's exemplified in this statement. There are planes beyond our knowing, but when we apply the principle of correspondence to them, we are able to understand much that would otherwise be unknowable to us.
And the only thing I would say is that you have to get rid of any bias. You have to be very, very simplified. Very simplified, because if you have a bias or a judgment, then you can't apply that law.
Isn't that a bias and a judgment?
Well, I
Isn't
mean,
that
you know
statement a
something?
bias and a judgment?
I guess we all, I just think that if I'm going to do it in the most powerful, potent way, I have to pull out any bias I have about anything. I like a sunny day. I like the sun shining. Well, if that happens up in Antarctica, then, we're all in trouble. If it sun shines all the time, and, then we're in trouble.
It could be really cold, though.
Well,
be able to take
I'm
beautiful
saying
photos.
that if you take your bias out of it. So this is going to be interesting to see how we go as we move on.
Well, here's another. It's funny because this might be part of the Weasel Clause too. Here, the ancient Hermeticists considered this principle as one of the most important mental instruments by which man was able to pry aside the obstacles which hid from view the unknown.
I couldn't agree with that more. Yet I'm going to still go back to, and if you can be unbiased, you can get to more of a powerful truth. If you have a bias, you've lost it.
Okay. Good. Until next time. This has been a production of EI Publishing in association with EI Alliance. Listen to other episodes and visit eipublishing.com for the transcript of this series as an ebook and to find more energized podcasts and books. Find New Threads' self-titled album, New Threads, on iTunes, Spotify, Bandcamp, or at newthreads.us. Thank you for listening.